Today, we're going to hear from Ben Sargent about the Southern Pacific Llano Branch. So without further ado, if you for some reason don't know Ben, he was a longtime political cartoonist for the Austin American Statesman, and I believe syndicated as well, and a longtime railroader and modeler here in Austin. And I believe he also has worked on the Austin Steam Train Association with them as a volunteer for many, many years, and knows a whole lot about Austin railroading and what's going on in the area. So today we are very pleased to have Ben Sargent talk about the Southern Pacific Llano Branch here in Austin. Hi, Ben.
Hi there. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Well, thank you. And this is Ben Sargent. And I want to thank all of you, my friend George Zapalak, and everybody at the Austin Model Railway Society for the opportunity to give you a quick historical overview of what was once the Southern Pacific Llano Branch northwest of Austin. I regularly travel part of that route as a conductor on the Austin and Texas Central's excursion trains, so it is a subject that is near and dear. For Austin's first 3 decades or so of existence, the state capital was on Texas' remote Comanche frontier. The city was an uncomfortable 3 or 4 days by stagecoach from Houston, and steamboat access by the Colorado River was prevented by a massive log raft only 10 miles from the river's mouth. So Austin was a prime candidate for the steam railroad, which finally arrived on Christmas Day of 1871, when the Houston and Texas Central's engine number 22, the Theodore Cossie, whistled in on the H&TC's newly completed branch connecting Austin and Houston via Brenham. The H&TC was joined 5 years later by the International and Great Northern, building across the state from its northeast corner to the Mexican border at Laredo. Austin's first homegrown railroad followed in short order when the Austin Northwestern was chartered in 1881. Austin merchant Rudolph Bertram persuaded a group of Iowa investors led by brewer J.A. Romberg to invest in a rail line to tap the resources of the hill country north and west of Austin. The rugged, rocky landscape through which the projected line was to run was so rough that a wagon journey from Burnett to Austin was 2 days each way. The ANNW's organizers concluded that the most prudent way to build the road was narrow gauge, 3 feet between the rails, as narrow gauge offered considerable economies in construction, equipment, and operation. And I love this photo, which is actually on the Marble Falls branch, but you can see the track there with the 35-pound rails and the cedar ties. I don't know if I would be confident in running a locomotive over that or not. Though grandly projected to run from Austin to Abilene on the Texas and Pacific's transcontinental line, the ANNW first set its sights 60 miles away on Burnett. Construction commenced in 1881, and by the end of the year reached the new town site of Bertram. Resuming in the spring, the line reached Burnett in May of 1882 and began carrying passengers, cedar posts, stock, and granite blocks, which were hauled to Burnett in wagons over the 35-pound rails laid on rough-hewn cedar ties. The trains were powered by 4 20-ton American 440 engines built by the Thomas Paul Locomotive Works and 1 28-ton Consolidation 280 built by the Mount Savage Works. Photographic evidence of the narrow gauge power is rare, but we do have this shot of the fine-looking Consolidation number 5. In the narrow gauge era, daily operations generally consisted of 2 passenger trains and 2 freight jobs daily. Not much is known in detail about the ANNW's narrow gauge cars, passenger or freight. And this is some of the passenger cars, and it's very interesting to see the side door arrangement there on combine number 1. By the end of narrow gauge operations, the road owned 3 coaches and 3 baggage mail cars. The freight cars, of which there were 93 at the time of standard gauging, were mostly flat cars and box cars with a coal car, a few stock cars, and some maintenance of way cars. In Austin, the ANNW's narrow gauge terminal facilities were alongside the H&TC's standard gauge tracks in the 4th Street yard, which extended east from East Avenue, now I-35, between 4th and 5th Streets. And I've highlighted the narrow gauge trackage there in yellow. The ANNW built a small roundhouse near Navasota Street, a 2-story wooden depot on San Marcos Street, and a yard that included a freight house for transfer of loads between the narrow gauge and standard gauge cars. During construction of the Capitol, a narrow gauge track extended out of the yard and northward on East Avenue to 12th Street, turning westward onto the Capitol grounds on a tall trestle over Waller Creek. In addition to the depot in Austin, the ANNW's original line ran by wooden train order stations at Leander, Liberty Hill, Bertram, Wilkie, and Burnett, and later at Fairland, Marble Falls, Kingsland, and Llano. In May of 1893, the railroad, this is right after standard gauging, the railroad sent out a photographer to record all the stations, which is where most of these pictures had come from. And I know I read at one time that the Leander station was at one time was the smallest train order station on the entire Southern Pacific system. So it had that distinction. In addition, the depot at Mcneil, built by the International Great Northern, served as a joint depot and interlocking tower for the crossing of the ANNW and the IGN. As was the case more often than not at the time, the ANNW ran quickly into chronic financial difficulties, but enjoyed a stroke of good fortune as construction began on the massive new state capitol. The state had rejected as unsuitable the originally planned outer walls of Indiana limestone, and the owners of Granite Mountain near Marble Falls offered to donate the necessary Texas pink granite. The contractor agreed if the state would provide convict labor and a railroad extension to the quarry. And so the ANNW extended southwestward from Burnett to Granite Mountain in 1885. The line built a bit further into Marble Falls 4 years later. During the Capitol construction, an estimated 16,000 carloads of granite moved to a dressing yard in the Wilkie Y, then to the building site in Austin. Later rock movements included the granite and limestone for the Galveston seawall and jetties and many other projects around the state. In 1891, the ANNW's narrow gauge era came to an end when the road was purchased by the Houston and Texas Central. The H&TC immediately relayed the entire 78 miles of track to standard gauge and replaced iron rail with steel. The conversion, of course, also required replacement of all the road's engines and cars, and the H&TC, obliged by supplying 12 standard gauge locomotives, 10 used in freight service and 2 on passenger jobs. They included 3 440s built by Rogers in 1872, such as the number 1 here outside the H&TC's old stone roundhouse in Austin, and 5 10-wheelers built by Cook in 1887. The other 4 engines, there's no record. All were renumbered as ANNW 1 through 12. And then later, of course, just regular H&TC power got mixed in, as needed. Here, this is number 218, 10-wheeler clearly on a maintenance away job. With standard gauging, the ANNW was provided with standard gauge passenger cars from the H&TC's fleet. The first 3 were listed as second-class coaches, which may have been narrow gauge cars on standard gauge trucks. By 1900, however, the ANNW was running 4 first-class coaches, 4 second-class, 3 combines, and 1 baggage mail car. To meet the increasing freight traffic, the ANNW acquired a sizable fleet of new boxcars, 70 of them, and 200 flat cars, rocks then as now being a priority for the railroad, from the Ensign Manufacturing Company. which built most freight cars for the SP. Curiously enough, no contemporary records list any cabooses. After 1902, the freight car fleet was officially absorbed into that of the H&TC. In 1891, the H&TC extended the line from Fairland between Marble Falls and Burnett, 29 miles west to Llano. At the time, an iron boom was in progress around Iron Mountain near Llano, though within a few years it became apparent that the iron ore was not present in commercially exploitable concentrations. The difference between the part of the Llano branch laid narrow gauge, with tighter curves, steeper grades, wooden bridges, and the part laid standard gauge, broader curves, easier grades, and several beautiful steel through truss bridges is evident even today. And this interesting shot has the word Austin written in the corner, but it is actually the bridge over the Colorado River at Kingsland. When the legislature in 1899 authorized the H&TC to take complete control of the former ANNW, it required that a new depot and division offices be built in downtown Austin, and that the line be extended north from Burnett 23 miles to Lampasas to connect with the Santa Fe. This branch was completed in 1903 and abandoned in 1951. The H&TC, including the Llano branch, was leased to the Texas and New Orleans in 1927 and merged into the TNNO in 1934. And the TNNO was officially absorbed by the Southern Pacific in 1961, although since the late 1870s, the H&TC was controlled by SP interests. Through most of its history, the branch, like most American lines at the time, ran on the timetable and train order system, with regular trains authorized by timetable and other movements authorized by train orders telegraphed to line-side stations. The basic operation of the Llano branch consisted of a daily passenger train in each direction, with freight trains run as needed as extras. Over the years, interesting experiments were tried to accommodate the branch's far-flung trackage. One timetable in the mid-20s shows a train from Lampasas that made a round trip to Burnett when the westbound train arrived in the morning, and then did it again when the eastbound train came back from Llano in the afternoon. A later schedule had the regular Austin to Llano train make a side trip to Lampasas on the westbound run and a side trip to Marble Falls on the eastbound run. SP passenger service on the branch ended in 1937. In the 1930s, federal dam builders constructed the chain of highland lakes that extend from Austin into the hill country. And to carry materials to two of those sites, the SP operated a branch from Beverly Switch to Buchanan Dam site between 1931 and 38, and another branch from Rutledge Switch to the Mansfield Dam site between 1936 and 39. And that right-of-way still survives as Highway 620. And here you can see the fairly spectacular S-shaped wooden trestle that was at the Buchanan Dam site. After the end of SP passenger service, the branch operated in freight service, primarily hauling quarry products, until the SP, facing declining revenues, sold its tracks in 1984 from Giddings into Austin, plus the Llano branch, for $8 million to the city of Austin, which wanted to preserve the route as a future transit corridor. In 1986, ownership of the city's former SP railroad passed to the newly organized transit agency Capital Metro, which began commuter operations between Austin and Leander in 2010. The route was upgraded to fully signalized centralized traffic control and service provided by lightweight diesel multiple unit commuter vehicles. Freight service continued on the branch, at least from Marble Falls to Austin and later to Giddings, with a series of contract operators culminating in the current freight carrier Watco Companies, which operates its trains as the Austin Western. Maintenance, dispatching, and commuter operations are contracted to Herzog Transit Services. The senior partners on the line, though, is the Austin Steam Train Association, chartered as a nonprofit in 1989, which began operating weekend excursion trains with vintage passenger equipment over the Cedar Park to Burnett segment of the branch in 1992. Service began with the restored SP Mikado number 786, but with that engine out of service for a major rebuild, regular service with the volunteer staff trains has continued uninterrupted with diesel power. And in putting together this narrative, I wanted to especially thank Lester Haynes, the publisher of the late great Journal of Texas Shortline Railroads, as well as the resources of the Austin History Center and Capital Metro. And thanks to all of you guys, and thanks everybody. And that's what I've got.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm sure there's some questions out there. So if anybody has a question, now is a really great time to ask it about the Llano Branch.
We've got a question. I'm kind of in charge of the layout design committee, and we would like to put something of the branch into our layout. Are there any maps available that show more detail of where sidings would be and where industries were located, and maybe a listing of industries that the railroad served throughout the years?
I'm sure there are. The thing that we would really like to find is the ICC valuation maps for this branch, and we have looked and looked and never been able to find anybody who has them in their archives. I know for a lot of, these were the maps that the government required between about 1910 and 1917, and they were very detailed and showed all the tracks, all the industries and everything. Another good, until we can find those valuation maps for the Llano Branch, would be at least in the towns, the Sanborn fire insurance maps, which you all may be with, which are very good, show railroad trackage in great detail, and of course all the buildings that are alongside them. But let me work on that to see if there are other resources. John B. Charles, who's on our steam train board, he has done a lot of research in this area, and I might get with him and see if there are any railroad documents that we're not thinking about that might list such things.
That would be most helpful. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I can see that. Mm-hmm.
Related question, Ben. To model the branch, are there some iconic features that you think would be important to represent, to try to convey some of the historic character of the line, as well as maybe some of the scenic features and that sort of thing? Are there some specific elements that we might try to include in our layout?
I guess the things that would be the most sort of iconic about the Llano Branch would be, one would be the Mcneil Interlocker at Mcneil, where it crosses what's now the UP, the San Gabriel River Trestle, which is our one piece of scenery on our route up there on the steam train. And of course the quarry operations, which are spotted all up and down the line, some smaller and some larger. If one were modeling something west from Fairland, of course there are all those lovely steel bridges out on that stretch, and of course for quite a ways it goes alongside the Llano River. But yeah, those are some of the things I would think would be kind of iconic. Plus a lot of the depots that are no longer there. The only one that's really out there right now is our Bertram Depot, which is not really the original depot, although it is an SP depot. It's a San Antonio and Aransas Pass depot that we were donated and moved from Orange Grove, Texas, down in South Texas, but is restored to look pretty much like a country depot would look in 1912 when it was built. But those are some of the things that would come to mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anybody else?
Ben, are there any books that have good material accumulated in one place on this line?
I know there is and I'm blanking on the name of the author now. There's a good history of the TNNO in Texas that had a chapter on the branch, and really my go-to source on it is Lester Haynes. I don't know if some of you may remember that he used to publish a regular journal called the Journal of Texas Shortline Railroads, and each issue would be on a different short line around the state. And he did an issue that was very well researched on the Austin Northwestern and the Llano Branch. So that's probably the best resource if you can find a copy of that. Although Lester did tell me that they also have it on CD now as well. So it has all the text and pictures on CD, but those are probably some good sources right there.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And Ben, I know during the building of the Capitol, when they were bringing all the granite blocks to downtown Austin, that there were several mishaps that tumped out chunks of granite. And I know where a couple of those are. Do you know if anybody has documented where those crashes were and where we might find those granite blocks today?
Well, as you're going on our excursion trains up and down the road, you can see occasionally along the way, you'll see some big granite blocks just lying down in the ditch and they are there from those days, but it's been considered just, I guess, too costly to try to lift them out of the ditch and get them back onto a railroad car. One of our volunteers did a calculation one time from the measurements of them and decided each one of those weighs about 40 tons. So you can see the challenge of lifting it out and why it might not be economical. Probably the most spectacular spill was on the Brushy Creek Bridge in Cedar Park, which is east from our Cedar Park depot, where there's a high trestle there that goes over Brushy Creek. And early on in the Capitol construction era, there was an engineer named Charlie Inlow who was taking a train east over that bridge, and there's a fairly steep grade down to the bridge and then up on the other side. And so apparently in the narrow gauge days, these guys would widen it out and try to pick up some speed when they hit the bridge so that they could make it up the other side. Well, he somehow misjudged, and when they hit the bridge, all of his, I can't remember how many cars it was 7 or 8 cars of rock, turned over, leaving the engine and the caboose still on the rails. And all the granite went down into the creek there, and they recovered the cars, but the granite is all still there. And the city of Cedar Park, I think, has built a little park around it and walking trail and stuff. So it is possible to go down and see it, and they've sort of made a little public area out of it. But Charlie Inlow still holds the record for speed of unloading granite on the Austin Northwestern.
Very good.
Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, Ben, you mentioned the South San Gabriel River trestle, and I know from working on the steam train that there were water tanks located on either side of the river there during the steam locomotive days, and the footings are still visible. Do you have any, or have you ever seen any photos of the tanks themselves? And do you know how they got the water from the river up to the tanks?
I have not seen any pictures of the tanks. I know that, yes, and you're absolutely right. There are visible water tank footings on the east side of the San Gabriel Bridge on either side of the track. And I know that the SP never had any double water tanks anywhere, so I'm sure they had one on one side and then built a new tank and put it on the other side at some point. There's also in the Wilkie Y, there are some water tank footings that are still there. I don't know about on the San Gabriel. We've always presumed that they pumped the water out of the river. So I presume if one were to poke around those tank footings, you could probably find the foundations of a pump house somewhere because I presume that's where the water would have come from. But yeah, both of those places are marked on the timetables as places where engines would take water. But I've never seen a picture of the tanks themselves.
And at that
Ben,
time,
in
did they?
Marble Falls, Ben, in Marble Falls, there's a passenger station there. Is that the original station that was on the line? It's on, today it's located on 281.
Yeah, it's been
South.
moved over there to the highway, and it's like the Chamber of Commerce office or something, isn't it? Something like that.
It was Chamber of Commerce. They moved. It's now the Hill Country bus system.
Oh, okay. I think that is the original depot. And somewhere, I think in Lester's book, there's a picture of the original depot. We'll have to go back and take a look at that and compare. But I think you're right. I think that one does still exist. There is also a depot in Llano, but that is a new structure that was built to look like the original station was gone. But the Marble Falls depot may very well be the original one, which I guess would make it the only original depot that's still out there, even though it's not by the track at this point.
And back on the water for the steam engines, back in the Austin and Northwestern days, did they do any treatment of the water to use in the steam engines?
That's a good question, because certainly when we were running steam, we very thoroughly treated the water. We didn't have what we really needed was a water treatment plant, which we didn't have, but we would put lots of boiler chemicals into the tender because the water, as you can imagine, out here in the hill country is very hard. It's just full of rocks, and putting it through boiling it off in a steam boiler really brings those out and limes up the tubes and the flues in the engine. But I don't know. I presume they must have had some way of, so that would be a good thing to research, some way of treating it, or some way of countering the natural hardness of the water. Because yeah, especially on those smaller engines, it would lime up even faster, I think.
Ben, do you know anything about the history of the company there in Marble Falls, which today is Huber? I think prior to that, it was Clear Stone Company.
Mm-hmm.
You know anything about the history of that company?
I do not. I know that Huber is over there, and that's kind of the one shipper they have at Marble Falls, but I don't really know anything about the background of it. I'm not even exactly sure what they do over there. I guess it's either rocks or
I think they make
lime or something.
calcium treated limestone.
Is that
sort
it?
of clay-like.
Yeah. Right.
I was curious about what freight they're pulling out of along the line now, and when they do it, given that the passenger of the train, the commuter rail, has it most of the time.
Most of the freight on the line, a lot of it is kind of what it's traditionally always been, is quarry products, is rocks, chemical lime, aggregate, road material, but also they move a lot of lumber on the line. They used to have some shippers that shipped beer into Austin, but I think that shipper is off the line now. But there's a big lumber transloading facility up there near Seward, which is near Liberty Hill, and they move a lot of lumber cars up there. But I guess the preponderance of the freight is quarry products, and it's all with the railroad is divided now by Capital Metro into 3 divisions. Is from kind of about the Austin Y east to Giddings is the eastern sub, and then from a place called Bill, which is just west of Leander, out to Marble Falls is the western sub, and then in the middle is the central sub, which is where the commuter operation is. The freight operation actually has to overlap with the commuter operation. So there's an elaborate system of schedules where they have windows for the freight operation, usually at night, to run the trains when the commuter trains are not running. Because as you may or may not know, the commuter vehicles they bought are what they call FRA non-compliant, which means that they cannot be on the same territory at the same time as regular railroad equipment. So when the commuter trains are operating, then excursion trains and freight trains can't be in that same stretch of track. So it takes some, and they're improving it. The new shipment of commuter cars they got are FRA compliant, so they can operate on the same territory and time as a regular railroad train. In fact, our excursion train has had a couple of meets with commuter equipment there at Leander, which is kind of neat. But it's, and of course the central sub is all fully signaled and separated into blocks and stuff. So the dispatcher has really close control over that.
Are there any shippers left on the central sub?
I'm trying to think. I think there are some down there in down as you go into North Austin, but I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to find out.
We've
Yeah,
got
there used to be a lot of them, and then a lot of them got off. Yeah.
BMC is there in Cedar Park.
Yeah, they have a big operation there. That's true. Which again is more lumber being moved around, but they do have a big thing there. And further down into Austin, I'm not exactly sure.
There's a siding East Austin that a lot of times will have what looks like newly built rail cars just stored there. Do you know anything about where those come from and where those are going?
I think that's a Milby siding, which is over in East Austin. If you're crossing over the railroad there on Ed Bluestein Boulevard, you can look down there to the west and usually see the end of the siding there, and there's usually cars parked on it. I am not exactly sure I know they use it. It's a long siding and they use it for storage quite a bit, but I'm not sure what those cars are or where they're bound.
Mm-hmm.
They used to put the circus train on Milby siding when the circus train would come.
Yeah, that was always a stunner. They'd be there camped out and sort of hanging out there for the week or whatever they were there.
Yeah, that's right. Love the circus train.
There's a City of Austin has a material yard up off of it's east of Burnett Road, north of Breaker.
Oh, the Kramer Lane siding.
Yeah, the Kramer Lane. Yeah, that siding seems to be active.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think they still use that for it's the electrical. It's by an electrical facility there, and they use that I think a lot for city related loads. In fact, on the excursion train, before we built our yard in Cedar Park, that was where we would store the train was on Kramer Lane siding.
There used to be a beer distributor that was south of there, about a half a mile. I don't know if they're still active or not.
I don't either. It's been so long since I've been down that part of the line. I'm not sure if they're still online or not. But yeah, there used to be a lot of beer cars, and there used to be a waste paper facility kind of downtown that was that had a lot of shipments of recycled paper and coming in and out of there. But I think it's been moved somewhere else.
Yeah,
and there are quarry products east of Austin as well, out toward for aggregate and road material and that sort of thing, out toward Manor and Littig.
Yeah, that Balcones recycling place you mentioned used to have this beautiful little diamond crossing
Oh,
across
yeah.
the main.
Yeah,
It was just troublesome as heck for the trains, but it was beautiful.
I used to love going through that because I would tell people, if you built this on your model layout, people would laugh at it. And they say, no, a real railroad wouldn't do that. Because you're right. They took the spur off to one side of the main track, and then it crosses over the main track on a diamond and goes into the industry. And yeah, other modelers would say that's not authentic.
No, that was totally neat. They had like greasers up and down to try and keep the freight trains on it as they'd be rolling through.
Yeah,
Every once in a while, one would go in the ditch. And
yeah, it's a very sharp curve there. One thing we got when that paper warehouse closed up was there was a boxcar, a Chicago Northwestern steel boxcar that was inside their warehouse, and it had been inside the warehouse for 20 years or something. And when they closed that warehouse, they asked us if we wanted the boxcar. We said, yeah, we'll take it. We took it out to Cedar Park, and it was just pristine because it had been inside for 20 years.
cool. Was it a 40-footer or was it later than that?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, with the.
okay.
Well, I'm sorry, it was a 50-foot box car with plug doors, but it was
Okay.
a nice car.
Yeah. What would they ship the beer in that these distributors would get? What would they use to ship those?
I would see box cars there. I don't know how I don't know how it was loaded in the box cars. I don't know if it was kegs or what.
Wasn't refrigerated, or it was just plain old.
Didn't appear to be refrigerated. No.
Just since we brought it up a couple of times, what's the latest on the steam train? Are we ever going to see the steam engine back?
Oh, we are. Yeah, we're of course right now we're just trying to keep our head above water with pandemic restrictions. It's really been a tough time for the passenger operation, and we're sort of all of our energy and attention is concentrated on that. But yeah, we have weekly work parties out there on the steam engine, working on painting the frame, exercising the appliances, measuring and getting ready for the next step on that is getting a crane out there to lift the boiler and to lift the frame and put them on better cribbing, because we need to have the frame on higher cribbing so we can get down there and start test fitting the shoes and wedges and so on, because the next step is getting the frame on the drivers. And then once we've done that and get that all locked down, then it'll be putting the boiler on the frame. Mm-hmm. So it is proceeding. And probably about that point, we would start looking for a steam contractor to come out and and finish it. I mean, it's basically a reassembly project at this point, but we are certainly still accepting contributions to help pay for the effort, and still accepting volunteers to come out and help on the work days.
That's great. So there's nothing that's someplace else being worked on anymore. All the parts have kind of come back, and it's
everything's back in Cedar Park now. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes. Who are the authors of History of TNO and the journal?
The journal is Lester Haynes, Haines. I would have to go look up my copy of the book on the TNO, but I could look that up later and maybe email it over to George. Would that work?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay.
Thanks, George.
Yeah.
Well, I think our own Jodell Morris was the author on one of those, the TNO books.
Yeah, I think he did one on TNO in Texas.
Yeah, there was he had some partner too that did, I think, another one. So
yeah,
those are excellent books.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ben. This was quite a treat. Thanks for spending some of your Saturday morning with us, and really valuable information. So really appreciate your being here, and hope we can do this again sometime.
Okay, I'd love to do it, and everybody come out and ride with us sometime, and or volunteer if you like. And I really appreciate the opportunity to yammer on about the Llano Branch, because I can do it for pretty much endlessly. I'm doing it to passengers all the time.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And you're welcome to hang around for our business meeting, but you know, don't feel like you have to.
Okay.
It's boring
Well,
stuff, but you're more than welcome to if you got nothing else to do.
Well, I appreciate that. I always say that after war, the second most useless human occupation is the meeting.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to have to go take a birthday gift to my grandson. But otherwise, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys, and excited about all that y'all are doing.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ben.
Bye-bye.